This week's programme is going to be an attempt to explain why some airguns are more expensive than some others. And I'm pretty convinced I will get some highly opinionated responses to this week's subject matter. But when has that ever bothered me? Here goes. Hello and welcome to AAR On Air. This week's programme is going to be titled, Is £1,000 plus too much to pay for an airgun? And I suppose it should have a subtitle of the true cost of a quality airgun. Now I'm going to use 3 examples here, and they're chosen very specifically for several reasons, namely price, country of origin, purpose, power potential, accuracy, and of course quality, of which longevity goes with that last part too. Yes, it could just as easily been 3 others, and no, there is no bias because I really like all 3 for their own individual reasons. Oh, and yes, they just happen to be PCPs for the angry Springer shooters out there, but the same still applies in the world of break barrels. The guns I have here are a Snowpeak PR900, which comes in at around £250 UK, which for a PCP is pretty good value. The second one is the BSA R12 CLX Pro. In this case, it's the Cayenne Manelli laminated stock version that will set you back around £1,450 UK. And finally, I have the higher end of the price range in this Epic 2 with folding stock, and this one is the Benchrest Vector Air Limited Edition in Vector Orange and Black. This will cost you up to around £2,500 depending on your individual build choices. Each one of these I have already reviewed and thoroughly enjoyed in their own ways. But this isn't about the review of each directly, more the reasons why they differ so much in price. I get told so many times, why spend all that much money when buying something because X airgun is just as accurate and just as good, and a personal favourite of mine, why spend that much money when you can buy a second-hand Y airgun for the same money and have better quality? To the latter, I simply say you're not comparing apples with apples, because yes, you can buy a second-hand Maserati for the same money as a new Ford Fiesta, but when it comes to service costs, reliability, previous owners' unhistoried abuse, cost of maintenance, etc., they are just 2 entirely different things, and as such, I will dismiss that argument straight away. Wait for the comments. So let's look at the costs of producing these 3, shall we? Firstly, we have the R&D or research and development costs, which for a smaller company producing high quality products is going to represent a fair chunk of their operating costs, as opposed to a very simple low cost item that is going to be produced in vast numbers out of a factory in China. Understanding not only is this going to be stacked high and sold cheaply, it is also going to be used by several other companies and rebadged with their labels and given slightly low cost changes to try and set it apart from the base version, made out in that same factory in China. I believe there are around 4 versions of this under different names, and I can think of those straight off the top of my head, making this product much cheaper in R&D terms. The higher end will spend more time in research and development, being designed and engineered for maximum feel, functionality, and to give the end user as much personal feel and pleasure in use as possible, rather than simple functionality. It will also have the ability to produce higher power levels from the same gun in situations that will allow, such as each country's laws and licensing restrictions, or simply allowances. You really won't get 100 foot-pound plus out of the PR900, but the Epic will do that with ease in the correct calibre, and again, if the individual has the licenses to allow them to have that level of power. We also have the cost of tooling to make these things. Again, if you're making tens of thousands, you can swallow up the costs of your engineering machines easier, and they're probably not working to the same tolerances as a more expensive setup. Whilst we're talking quantities, if you're making tens of thousands, then your barrel costs are going to be less. And yes, the quality of the steel is going to be potentially of lower grade than, say, a CZ barrel or even a cold hammer forged one. And smaller quantities are more expensive and of course usually come with a minimum order of say 500 or 1,000 items. Not forgetting that is for each calibre. So a company wanting to have 177, 22, 25 and 30 calibres in their lineup is likely to need to order up to 4,000 items as a minimum, and that doesn't come cheap, needing a lot of investment. BSA are able to reduce those costs a little by producing their own high quality barrels in-house, and they have done for years, meaning that original machine cost has probably been swallowed up by now, and BSA also keep the number of calibers available down. But they have to pay specialist people on their payroll to get them just right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's also take into consideration stocks, because buying a stock from the likes of Minelli pretty much guarantees you the highest quality, but also comes with a minimum order quantity. This I know from the AAR limited edition I made, because 200 was below their minimum order amount. So this was very kindly linked into an order BSA were making at the time, and we got the minimum order covered off. Once again, thank you BSA. And again, 500 to 1,000 minimum is not unusual in the industry. Of course, that isn't an issue on such as the PR900 because of higher production numbers and of course lower cost materials in either plastic or beech wood being used in their stocks. Certainly not high-end walnut or laminates. The Epic 2, of course, is made in-house and is metal in this case, but they do, however, have a wood version in walnut, which again is likely to be subject to a minimum order quantity. Subcontracting. Yeah, naturally, on a smaller production line, you are likely to outsource some of the engineering to free up the costs of buying machinery and employing more people at the high cost of wages, national insurance, pensions, etc., etc. But of course, this subcontracting still is a cost and ultimately has to be added to the overall price of the product. Starting to get the idea? We're just scraping the surface at the moment. Let's continue. Wages. Well, in the UK and most of Europe, there is a minimum amount that has to be paid out in wages. This may not apply out in the communist bloc, out in the People's Republic of China, which links into the cost of factory overheads. And some factories don't have the same running costs or the need to meet the same strict and stringent working environment conditions, which all cost money. Indeed, some factories are subsidised by the people's government. Cost of materials has quite a bearing too. Quality materials are naturally more expensive than cheaper metals. I wish I got £1 for every time I've heard someone use the term Chinesium. Okay, what about transport and shipping? There are costs involved on a local level and international level. It's worth noting that a slow boat from China is far cheaper than air freight, but still comes at quite a heavy price unless you're filling shipping containers with high quantities of product. Shipping across Europe is also very expensive, either by land or air freight, and can represent thousands of pounds of an order's value and costs, not to mention the import-export licence fees and the shipping agent's fees and the import duties that will apply. And if Border Force in the UK decide they don't want to deal with your order that day, they'll put it into warehousing and charge you hundreds of pounds per day for the privilege. And the expense often doesn't end there. You see, if you're importing from Europe, they all have different power regulations, and when they eventually arrive at base, each one has to be reset to the UK sub 12 foot-pound maximum power levels, and then locked off to prevent any Tom, Dick or Harriet from deciding they know better and want to wind it up to a cannon with illegal power levels, knowing they will simply blame the shop if they ever get caught, which incidentally never washes with plod. Now, the ultra budget items will often come in set to the UK spec, or whatever country they have been set for. Again, because such high quantities are easier to build to that specification. It is worth noting that they will often vary in power levels though, because the quality control is not as stringent as a higher end product. So you may get, say, 11.75 foot-pounds or 10.4 foot-pounds or somewhere in between in the same batch of rifles. The same applies often, even if it's a regulated gun. After all, you could pay the equivalent price of the PR900 for a decent quality regulator in some instances. Whilst we're talking expenditure then, when the products reach base in the UK, you have the shops or importers' costs, which are the overheads of the business, which takes the form of buildings, rents, rates, staff salaries, national insurance costs, pension commitments, heating, lighting, internet, water rates, phones, fittings and fixtures. Heck, the list is almost endless, and these costs can be very different for the different sized businesses, but they will all play a part. This naturally applies to the lower end and the higher end guns. Let's just add a few figures to some of those costs then, shall we? Starting with the lower costs that people aren't even aware of. Websites. They can be around £1,000 a year minimum for a reasonable sized company. Bank fees can represent anywhere between 1.5% and 3% of the turnover. If someone wants to pay by PayPal, then the cost is anywhere from 9 to 10% of the value of the transaction to the business. Then let's look at the taxman who always wants his cut, starting with VAT, which, as most people know, is 20% here in the UK. That's a fifth of the value of the transaction or item. Now, should a company be able to, against all odds, make a profit, then the taxman will take 25% corporation tax from that final figure, and that's a quarter of the profit gone in one go. Yes, all that information is correct and not fabricated or made up. So it's perhaps worth thinking the next time you want to buy a discounted item and ask the shop, what's your best price? Don't be too surprised if you get a bit of a strange look. Now, all the above is not a full and concise list, because you're still missing licensing fees, insurance, alarm systems, postages, marketing, building maintenance and repair costs, to add a few more. Now, it's fair to say some of these costs apply to all three of these rifles, but some of them are more relevant when dealing with the higher end items, and of course there is a higher outlay of capital in the first instance to stock these, which is either borrowed or hard earned and then put at risk every single day. So if you have such costs involved with a very low cost, low margin budget product, then they're likely to get less time spent on the quality control of them as opposed to a higher end cost item that should warrant greater attention to detail. This represents itself in the quality, and we're back to that longevity of the product. The greater focus on consistency of power levels that will ultimately reveal itself in accuracy. Now, there is no reason why the PR900 cannot be a really very accurate rifle. Indeed, I've shot many of them over the years and enjoyed them all. But the quality feel of the higher end product and the likelihood of being still around, doing it many years down the road, is probably higher with the higher priced items. And of course, it's a much better experience driving a Porsche 911 GT4 than a Hyundai i10. Even though they will both reach 60 mile an hour and get to you where you want to be without getting wet. But of course, not everyone can afford a Porsche, and that I appreciate. And of course, that's why the airgun industry has guns for most everyone's budget and taste. Long may that continue. And finally, to answer so many people's comments, no, a £2,500 air rifle is not 10 times better than a £250 rifle. But that's called the law of diminishing returns and is evident in everything in life, from posh or cheap fish and chips to Ferraris and Fiats. But you will always get the people who can afford a Ferrari and those who will favour Gordon Ramsay when it comes to their Friday night fish and chips. Whatever floats your boat and fits your budget, neither is completely right and neither is completely wrong. There you have it. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight to what the cost is of getting a gun to you and why people will pay the extra for a higher end rifle. Please give us the old thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the AAR on our website. And who knows, if you enter one of the competitions on there, you may well get your hands on one of these higher end guns for almost no money. A big thanks to Vector Air for their help and loan of these rifles, as always. That's it from me. Please stay safe and shoot safe, and hopefully I'll see you all next time with a gun review next time. Bye for now.